The horrifying Carboniferous Period, when insects became giants. Prehistoric documentary. Through breaks in the dense canopy, sunlight pierced the humid air, revealing monstrous dragonflies skimming the ancient swamps with wings wider than a modern hawk. The Carboniferous Period, over 300 million years ago, was a world suffused with oxygen, warmth, and relentless growth, where insects achieved sizes that defy imagination. Towering ferns and lycopsids formed labyrinthine forests, while giant arthropods ruled both sky and soil, shaping ecosystems in ways still visible in the fossil record. This is a journey into a realm of colossal life, survival, and evolutionary extremes. Step into a world where the ordinary became terrifyingly extraordinary. A sky dominated by wings. Above the humid swamps of the late Carboniferous, a creature the size of a modern crow sliced through the dense, oxygen-rich air with effortless grace. Meganeura, a giant dragonfly, boasted a wingspan exceeding 70 centimeters, dwarfing the largest insects alive today and transforming the very atmosphere into a hunting ground dominated by arthropod predators. Each delicate, yet rigidly veined wing, preserved in fossilized shale, reveals a network of crossveins and longitudinal supports that balanced flexibility with the strength required to lift a body mass far beyond modern analogues. The membranous structure, translucent yet remarkably resilient, allowed Meganeura to execute aerial maneuvers that would have left even contemporary dragonflies struggling to compete. Fossils from the Mazon Creek and Commentary Lagerstätten provide unparalleled detail, showing both the articulation points at the thorax and subtle ridges along the wing veins that acted as aerodynamic stabilizers. The musculature that powered such enormous wings was equally extraordinary. Fossilized thoracic segments suggest hypertrophied flight muscles anchored across a broad exoskeletal keel, enabling sustained flapping rather than mere gliding. These muscles, proportionally larger than those of modern insects, would have required vast oxygen intake, a physiological demand that the Carboniferous atmosphere uniquely supplied. At approximately 35% oxygen concentration, compared to today's 21%, diffusion through tracheal tubes could support far larger body volumes without triggering hypoxia. Studies of tracheal diameter and branching patterns in well-preserved specimens indicate that Meganeura could meet the metabolic needs of active predation while hovering, darting, or chasing smaller insects through the canopy. Predation strategies in the skies of the Carboniferous reveal an aerial ecosystem almost alien to the modern eye. Meganeura's mandibles, serrated and robust, could capture and immobilize prey mid-flight, while their compound eyes, composed of thousands of individual ommatidia, provided acute visual resolution over a panoramic field. Analysis of fossilized eye facets suggests a visual acuity comparable to that of modern dragonflies, with a sensitivity biased toward detecting motion, an essential adaptation in a sky teeming with both competitors and prey. Some paleontologists theorize that Meganeura could adjust flight altitude and speed according to light intensity, navigating between the shifting shadows cast by towering lycopsids and ferns below. The structural intricacies of the wing joints reveal even more about the mechanics of these colossal insects. The articulation between the fore and hind wings was reinforced with specialized sclerites that allowed precise control during mid-air turns and hovering maneuvers, a feature rarely seen in modern insects of comparable size. Fossilized impressions indicate that tiny interlocking spines along the wing bases prevented overextension, reducing the risk of damage during aggressive aerial pursuits. Moreover, microanalysis of preserved veins shows variations in thickness along the wing length, suggesting a deliberate evolutionary optimization. thicker veins at load-bearing points, and thinner membranes where flexibility was needed. These adaptations collectively enabled Meganeura to exploit complex air currents above swamp canopies, maximizing hunting efficiency and territorial defense, while minimizing energy expenditure. The aerodynamic properties of Meganeura's wings reflect an evolutionary balancing act between size and maneuverability. Computational fluid dynamics models, calibrated with fossil vein patterns, demonstrate that the leading edges of the wings created laminar flow zones that reduced drag, while the wingtip angles facilitated lift without sacrificing control. Observations suggest a glide-to-flap ratio optimized for both energy efficiency and rapid interception of prey, allowing these insects to patrol territories spanning hundreds of square meters. Such prowess not only established them as apex aerial predators, but also defined the selective pressures that other flying insects would face, creating an ecosystem in which size, speed, and sensory perception were inextricably linked. Evidence from the sedimentary contexts in which Meganeura fossils are found further illuminates their behavior and habitat preferences. Fossils often appear in fine-grained shale alongside aquatic and semi-aquatic plant remains, indicating that these dragonflies patrolled swamp edges and waterways. Some specimens preserve partial stomach contents, revealing a diet of smaller insects, including mayfly-like larvae and early beetle relatives, which themselves navigated the labyrinth of ferns and horsetails. The co-location of these fossils with plant detritus suggests that Meganeura exploited microhabitats created by the towering forests, hunting along sun-dappled clearings while avoiding denser shadows that could conceal competitors or predators. Isotopic studies of fossilized wing cuticle provide surprising clues about the metabolism and seasonal behavior of these aerial titans. Carbon and oxygen isotope ratios preserved in fossilized Meganeura exoskeletons suggest seasonal variations in diet and growth rates, indicating that these insects may have migrated vertically within the forest canopy or shifted hunting grounds in response to prey availability and climate cycles. Analysis also points to a higher retention of nitrogen in thoracic tissues, supporting the energetic demands of sustained flight during peak predatory activity. These chemical signatures not only reveal patterns of ecological interaction, but also hint at sophisticated metabolic regulation, allowing Meganeura to maintain both hunting efficiency and reproductive fitness despite its massive size. The sheer scale of these giants challenges our understanding of insect physiology. Meganeura's exoskeleton, composed of chitin and reinforced with calcium salts, provided a balance between rigidity and lightness, preventing structural collapse during flight. Modern biomechanical reconstructions indicate that the thorax could sustain repeated wing beats without fatigue for extended periods, a necessity in an era where aerial hunting demanded endurance. Additionally, the articulation of the wings with the thoracic sclerites allowed independent rotation of fore and hind wings, enhancing lift and maneuverability in confined spaces beneath forest canopies. These adaptations, preserved in exquisite fossil detail, highlight a level of sophistication in Carboniferous insect design that modern ecosystems rarely replicate. Yet, despite their dominance, these aerial titans were not invincible. Evidence of wing damage and predatory attacks, preserved in fossils, suggests that juvenile Meganeura and smaller adults faced constant threats from other giant arthropods, including large predatory millipedes and spiders. The interplay between size, predation, and resource availability created a delicate ecological balance in which gigantism could only be sustained by specific environmental conditions. High oxygen, stable temperatures, and abundant prey all contributed to the evolutionary niche that allowed wingspans to reach extraordinary dimensions. As the sun filtered through the towering ferns and lycopsids below, the silhouette of a giant dragonfly cutting across the sky would have been both awe-inspiring and terrifying, a living embodiment of the Carboniferous's ecological extremes. These creatures were not merely larger versions of modern insects. They were a testament to a world in which physiology, environment, and evolutionary opportunity converged in extraordinary ways. Their aerial dominion hints at the pressures and possibilities that shaped the rest of the Carboniferous ecosystem, where every shadowed branch and sunlit clearing below would influence the life that unfolded beneath. From these skies, the journey now descends into the dense forests that nurtured these giants, revealing the labyrinthine habitats where wings alone could not guarantee survival. Forests of green titans. The ground beneath the towering lycopsids was carpeted with dense ferns, mosses, and decaying plant matter that pulsed with life, creating a textured floor through which the largest insects of the Carboniferous had to navigate. The trunks of these ancient plants stretched tens of meters, forming vertical highways that shaped airflow and humidity, producing microhabitats in every shadow and sunlit clearing. Fossilized root systems reveal a subterranean network as intricate as the canopy above, anchoring colossal trees while providing niches for arthropods and early amphibians alike. Pockets of stagnant water collected among root tangles, becoming hotspots for larvae and juvenile insects, whose growth depended on these humid refuges. The forest floor was far from uniform. It undulated with decomposing plant matter, fallen fronds, and compacted peat, forcing large insects to develop precise, deliberate locomotion strategies to avoid predation or injury. Every towering frond created microclimates, altering humidity, temperature, and light intensity in its shadow, which had direct consequences for thermoregulation and respiratory efficiency. High humidity zones mitigated water loss for exoskeletons, while cooler, shaded areas slowed metabolism, allowing larger arthropods to conserve energy. Oxygen-rich pockets created by stagnant water and dense plant matter amplified the physiological potential for gigantism, enabling species like Arthropleura to maintain extraordinary size on the forest floor. Fossil analyses suggest that localized oxygen concentration could vary significantly between sunlit clearings and shadowed understory, creating microecological niches that insects exploited to optimize foraging and predator avoidance. These gradients imposed selective pressures on sensory organs, limb length, and body segmentation, shaping evolution in subtle yet profound ways. Within these corridors, giant insects navigated the complex understory with careful precision, their segmented legs adapting to the uneven terrain. Trackway fossils, preserved in fine silts and compacted peat, indicate careful placement and calculated stride, revealing movement patterns designed to avoid pitfalls such as sticky mud, fallen branches, or predatory reach. The largest millipede-like arthropods stretched several meters, their enormous segmented bodies moving slowly yet deliberately as they searched for detritus, spores, and smaller prey. These movements were choreographed by both instinct and environmental cues, with chemical signals from plants and other arthropods guiding navigation through this crowded and three-dimensional forest maze. Fallen logs and root tangles became both highways and hideouts for arthropod hunters and prey alike. Fossil evidence shows that predatory insects and arachnids used elevated perches to ambush herbivorous arthropods, while smaller insects exploited narrow gaps and decaying wood to escape detection. The interplay between open spaces and obstructed corridors created a dynamic ever-shifting arena of predator-prey interactions. Modern analogues, though smaller in scale, provide insight into how body morphology and behavior co-evolved with such spatial complexity, highlighting the intricate relationship between organism and environment during the Carboniferous. Seasonal flooding transformed sections of the forest floor into shallow, oxygen-rich pools teeming with insect larvae and juvenile forms, offering abundant resources but also significant risks. Rapidly rising waters could strand individuals in isolated puddles or expose them to predatory fish and amphibians, influencing survival rates and growth patterns. Fossil deposits often reveal concentrated aggregations of juvenile arthropods in these former floodplains, suggesting that reproductive timing and larval development were closely linked to seasonal hydrology. Such environmental pressures further reinforced gigantism, as larger individuals were better equipped to withstand floods, traverse swampy terrain, and outcompete smaller competitors for limited resources. The verticality of the canopy produced stratified habitats, from damp forest floor to mid-level fronds and sunlit emergent leaves, offering distinct ecological zones. Giant dragonflies and other aerial arthropods exploited mid-level corridors to hunt flying insects while avoiding denser shadows near the ground. The tallest fronds, swaying with wind and light, created a mosaic of sunlit patches that drove thermoregulation and activity cycles. Fossil impressions of insect exoskeletons attached to plant surfaces suggest that many species moved vertically with regularity, migrating between canopy layers to forage, rest, or reproduce, revealing a complex, three-dimensional ecosystem previously unimaginable. Chemical cues from plants and prey dictated movement patterns, revealing an invisible network of signals guiding every step, flight, or climb. Spore, dispersal, and volatile organic compounds acted as both food indicators and territorial markers, influencing insect distribution and competition. Paleobotanical evidence demonstrates that even the structure of fronds, the thickness of stems, and the density of foliage could alter chemical signaling, shaping the behavior of every arthropod within reach. In this way, the forest itself became a participant in evolutionary strategy, its physical and chemical architecture guiding life in subtle but profound ways. Fossilized plant-insect interactions further hint at feeding behaviors and habitat preferences unique to this era. Bite marks on ferns, lycopsids, and early seed ferns demonstrate selective herbivory, while tunnels and burrows in decaying wood reveal detritivore activity. These traces illuminate ecological networks, showing how insect species partitioned resources to minimize conflict and maximize growth potential. Some large insects appear to have specialized in navigating fallen logs or moss-covered substrates, a strategy that reduced competition with aerial hunters while still exploiting abundant nutrients. The density of vegetation created selective pressures that influenced body size, limb morphology, and sensory adaptations in ways that would persist through evolutionary time. Exoskeleton rigidity, joint articulation, and antennal length were all shaped by the need to maneuver through tightly packed forests, respond quickly to predators, and locate prey in near-dark conditions. Large body size conferred advantages in traversing obstacles, deterring smaller predators, and storing energy for reproduction. Yet it also imposed constraints that only the most physiologically and behaviorally adapted species could overcome. The interplay of opportunity and limitation sculpted a unique arboreal and forest floor world, one in which survival required constant negotiation with the environment itself. Through the shifting shafts of sunlight, the forest unveiled its intricate complexity, a dynamic world where evolution, physiology, and environment intersected. Giant insects moved with deliberation, pausing to hunt, hide, or navigate, their bodies shaped as much by shadowed corridors as by open glades. Here, wings alone could not guarantee dominance. Survival required an intimate understanding of the terrain, from waterlogged root tangles to sun-dappled clearings. Every frond, every fallen log, and every spore-laden surface held the potential to nurture life or exact a fatal misstep, revealing a carboniferous ecosystem where the largest insects were as much products of the forest's architecture as its apex predators. Arthropod kings of the understory. The shadowed understory became a maze of roots, mosses, and decaying fronds, where each movement demanded precision. The damp, spongy floor offered both sustenance and peril, as fallen fronds obscured hidden pools, sticky peat patches, and tangled root systems. Here, gigantism alone could not guarantee survival. Life required an intimate understanding of the terrain, where even a minor misstep could mean immobilization or predation. The light that filtered through the canopy revealed glimpses of massive arthropods gliding across the detritus, their segmented legs methodically negotiating every obstacle in a choreography shaped by millions of years of evolution. Giant millipede-like arthropods extended their segmented legs, navigating obstacles that dwarfed smaller insects, each step measured and deliberate. Fossil trackways, preserved in fine-grained sediments, reveal patterns of careful stride, showing that these creatures moved with calculated efficiency to conserve energy while foraging or evading predators. The spacing of footprints, combined with body width estimates from exoskeletal remains, suggests that these animals adjusted their gait to account for mud consistency, root protrusions, and the density of plant litter. In an environment dominated by uneven terrain, movement was as much a product of instinct as of necessity, reflecting the intimate interplay between physiology and environmental challenge. Exoskeletons glinted faintly in scattered shafts of sunlight, revealing reinforced plates and joint structures designed to withstand immense weight and frequent contact with sharp or abrasive surfaces. These hardened chitinous segments, sometimes layered with trace amounts of calcium, distributed mechanical stress evenly along the body, preventing damage while supporting lengths of up to 2 meters in Arthropleura. The segmentation also allowed flexibility. Each articulation worked in concert with the legs to negotiate curves, bends, and sudden drops in the forest floor, ensuring that mass and movement were harmoniously balanced. Microstructural analysis of fossilized cuticle hints at a degree of resilience previously unseen in modern terrestrial arthropods, reflecting a unique adaptation to life in a dense, often treacherous understory. Chemical trails and tactile signals guided every step, mapping invisible pathways through the undergrowth that even the largest insects could follow with precision. Sensory hairs on antennae and legs detected subtle vibrations from the environment, alerting these giants to the presence of predators, prey, or conspecifics. Some arthropods may have left pheromonal markers on fallen fronds or decaying logs, facilitating navigation and territory marking, while simultaneously reducing the risk of encounters with aggressive competitors. This sensory sophistication allowed Arthropleura to patrol territories hundreds of meters long, exploiting the forest floor's resources while avoiding conflict and maintaining metabolic efficiency. Some species exploited fallen logs and peat mounds as both shelter and hunting grounds, moving with methodical care to exploit prey hidden in crevices or beneath decomposing plant matter. The forest floor was a layered ecosystem. Below the topmost leaf litter lay an abundant detritivore community, which in turn attracted larger predators. Fossil evidence suggests that Arthropleura actively fed on smaller arthropods, spores, and decayed vegetation, a versatile diet that enabled these giants to thrive, even when prey density fluctuated seasonally. The interplay of food availability, moisture, and shelter created a dynamic environment in which adaptability, size, and sensory acuity determined survival. Respiratory adaptations allowed these terrestrial giants to thrive despite fluctuating oxygen levels and damp microhabitats. Enlarged tracheal tubes and extensive branching systems, inferred from fossilized thoracic morphology, ensured efficient diffusion of oxygen throughout the massive body. Seasonal waterlogging created hypoxic zones, yet these structures likely enabled continued activity even under low oxygen conditions. By efficiently distributing oxygen to muscles during locomotion and feeding, these adaptations permitted prolonged movement across challenging terrain and contributed directly to the evolution of gigantism on the forest floor. Interactions with coexisting organisms, from scavenging smaller prey to avoiding amphibian predators, shaped both behavior and morphology. Fossilized bite marks and partial exoskeletal remains indicate that predation pressures favored thicker cuticles and greater flexibility in limb articulation. Some species appear to have evolved stealthy foraging strategies, using slow, deliberate movements and careful selection of pathways to minimize detection. The constant negotiation between predator and prey created a complex behavioral web in which energy conservation, body design, and environmental awareness were inextricably linked. Growth patterns, indicated by exoskeletal segmentation, suggest that seasonal cycles and environmental pressures influence development and ultimate size. Increases in exoskeletal width and length over successive molts imply periods of rapid growth during times of high resource availability, while slower periods may have coincided with flooding or reduced prey density. Such cycles hint at a sophisticated interplay between metabolism, environmental conditions, and ecological opportunity, demonstrating that gigantism was not simply a matter of genetics, but also of timing, habitat exploitation, and adaptability. In the labyrinth of thick foliage, selective forces guided changes in body size, limb morphology, and sensory traits with long-lasting evolutionary consequences. Long antennae, strong limbs, and segment articulation were all responses to negotiating tangled roots, slippery peat, and decaying logs. Large size conferred advantages in deterring predators and accessing dispersed resources, but it also required precise adaptation to the microtopography of the forest floor. Every contour, every obstacle, every patch of moisture or decay became part of the selective landscape shaping behavior and physiology, highlighting the intimate connection between organism and environment. Amid the constantly changing forest floor, shaped by water, decay, and wind, these arthropods exemplified resilience, persistence, and the subtle mastery of a hidden world. Each movement, whether cautious or deliberate, reflected a dialogue with the environment, where survival depended on reading the cues embedded in roots, leaves, and detritus. Here, gigantism was both an advantage and a challenge, demanding a continuous balance between energy, vigilance, and spatial awareness. The dense understory teemed with life, yet only those capable of navigating its complexities could dominate, revealing an ecosystem as demanding and intricate as the skies above. Swamps and the breath of life. Mist rose from waterlogged hollows, thick with humidity and the scent of decay, hinting at the unseen abundance of oxygen saturating the air. These sun-dappled swamps stretched in all directions, a liminal world where water, vegetation, and atmosphere converged to create extraordinary ecological conditions. The air itself seemed denser, laden with oxygen levels far higher than today, infusing every breath of the forest with the potential to support life at unprecedented scales. In such a world, the largest insects did not merely survive, they flourished, their bodies expanding beyond the constraints imposed by modern atmospheres. Giant arthropods stretched their limbs across the mossy substrate, each segment powered by a respiratory system honed for extreme efficiency. Fossil evidence suggests that tracheal tubes branched extensively into every muscle and organ, allowing oxygen to reach distant extremities rapidly, despite immense body sizes. This extraordinary diffusion network enabled Arthropleura and contemporaneous insects to maintain metabolic function while moving across swampy, uneven terrain, where every step required energy and precision. The combination of oxygen, abundance, and adaptive physiology transformed the forest floor and shallow waters into a stage for biological giants. Tracheal tubes branched deep into every tissue, a network optimized for delivering oxygen to muscles and organs far larger than any modern analogues. Studies of fossilized thoracic and abdominal structures reveal hollow channels and reinforced air sacs, adaptations that prevented collapse under weight while supporting high activity levels. The scale of these structures suggests that, without hyperoxygenated conditions, such gigantism would have been physiologically impossible, confirming the crucial link between atmosphere and arthropod size. Each breath became a balancing act of opportunity and constraint, a delicate negotiation between environmental potential and biomechanical limitation. The very air of the Carboniferous swamps carried more than oxygen. It was a cocktail of nitrogen, carbon dioxide, and trace gases that influenced insect physiology in subtle ways. Elevated oxygen levels, estimated at 30–35%, allowed massive insects to maintain high metabolic rates and muscular performance, enabling sustained movement and foraging across the swamp floor. Carbon dioxide and trace gases influenced humidity, plant growth, and microclimate conditions, subtly shaping the habitats in which larvae and adults thrived. Evidence from fossil charcoal layers and isotopic analyses reveals that even minor fluctuations in atmospheric composition could stress developing arthropods, imposing limits on growth or concentrating populations in favorable pockets of the swamp. Among lush plant mats and shallow waters, microclimatic changes in oxygen concentration influenced how organisms grew, moved, and acted. Pockets of sunlit water increased photosynthetic output, enriching the local atmosphere and providing hotspots for feeding and development. In contrast, shaded or stagnant areas occasionally experienced lower oxygen availability, forcing insects to adjust foraging times, metabolic rates, or locomotion strategies. These microvariations fostered diversity in behavior and morphology, as even slight differences in airflow or humidity could favor certain adaptations over others. Preserved exoskeletons reveal that bigger insects were constrained in their movement, requiring prudent energy use to endure. Meganeura may have dominated the skies, but on the forest floor, the balance of mass, oxygen, and muscular power dictated movement. Slower locomotion minimized oxygen depletion while allowing precise navigation through complex terrain, and periodic pauses likely conserved energy for bursts of foraging or predator evasion. In this way, gigantism became both an asset and a challenge, a constant interplay between opportunity and restraint. Pools of stagnant water and submerged plant matter offered both sustenance and peril, attracting insects while exposing them to aquatic predators. Larval stages often developed in these humid, oxygen-rich niches where survival depended on both chemical sensing and timing. Fossilized trackways near such water bodies suggest that adults carefully circumnavigated danger zones while simultaneously exploiting nutrient-rich detritus. Swamp morphology dictated routes of movement, positioning resources and hazards in a spatial arrangement that continually tested adaptation and resilience. Every rise and fall of water, every layer of peat, sculpted a constantly changing hydrological landscape that dictated life and movement on the swamp floor. Waterlogged substrates challenged the largest arthropods, yet adaptations in leg structure, body weight distribution, and sensory perception allowed them to navigate safely across unstable terrain. Peat mounds and decaying plant matter provided both refuge and food, shaping foraging routes and sheltering juvenile insects. Fossilized trackways preserved in these sediments reveal deliberate patterns of movement, demonstrating that hyperoxygenation and hydrology together orchestrated the rhythms of life, dictating when and where these giants could roam. Giants faced additional challenges, from seasonal changes and episodic flooding, demanding adaptability to both oxygen-rich and hypoxic conditions. Sudden inundations could isolate individuals in shallow pools, alter microclimates, or temporarily reduce oxygen in the water and soil. In response, some arthropods evolved behavioral strategies such as climbing vegetation, slowing activity, or burrowing into drier peat. These responses illustrate how the Carboniferous environment required a continuous dialogue between physiology, behavior, and circumstance. Under constant threat from predators, giant insects faced amplified trade-offs, driving the evolution of thick armor, camouflage, and measured movements. Even the most massive insects remained vulnerable to amphibians, early arachnids, and rival arthropods, capable of ambush attacks in dense vegetation or shallow water. Fossil evidence of puncture marks and damaged exoskeletal segments hints at frequent encounters, suggesting that size alone was insufficient protection without accompanying vigilance and environmental awareness. Comparisons with modern insect physiology reveal how elevated oxygen levels allowed Carboniferous arthropods to exceed the limitations of contemporary tracheal systems. Modern analogues rarely reach lengths beyond a few decimeters, constrained by diffusion efficiency, metabolic demand, and gravity. In contrast, the hyperoxygenated Carboniferous atmosphere permitted multiple meter-long arthropleura and giant dragonflies to breathe efficiently, demonstrating how atmospheric composition can directly shape evolutionary potential. These conditions enabled a natural experiment in gigantism unmatched in terrestrial history. Piercing the dense foliage, sunlight broke through, and the shimmering expanse revealed both the opportunities and vulnerabilities inherent in a world sculpted by oxygen, where size was a blessing tempered by environmental risk. The largest insects roamed, hunted, and foraged with deliberate precision, yet each step, each flight, each pause reflected a negotiation with gravity, oxygen, availability, and predation. Hyperoxygenation allowed bodies to grow, but the same abundance that permitted such gigantism also imposed new vulnerabilities, demanding constant vigilance, adaptability, and energy efficiency. In these swamps, life pushed the limits of physiology and environment, demonstrating the extraordinary interplay between air, water, and the arthropods that dominated them. Predators among giants. A sudden splash shattered the mirrored surface of the swamp as a colossal hunter lunged with precision. The water trembled under the weight of its movements, revealing a body built for both power and stealth. Megarachne, and other giant arthropods exploited every opportunity the environment offered, hunting across water surfaces, clinging to submerged vegetation, or maneuvering through dense peat with uncanny agility. Their presence turned the swamp into a theatre of suspense, where even the largest insects above and below water had to respect the reach of these predators. Silent shadows slithered across saturated moss, limbs extended to seize any movement in the gloom. Fossil evidence suggests that some predators could sense vibrations through the substrate, detecting the approach of prey long before it was visible. In the dim, oxygen-rich undergrowth, every twitch of a frond or ripple of water became a signal, prompting split-second responses that determined life or death. Survival depended as much on reading the environment as on raw size or strength, a lesson learned by all who navigated these swamps. Every joint and segment of the predator's body worked in perfect unison, a machine honed for ambush and capture. The articulation of limbs, combined with reinforced exoskeletal plates, allowed predators to strike without overexerting themselves, conserving energy for long waits and sudden bursts of speed. Muscle attachment sites preserved in fossils reveal that even the largest specimens could achieve surprising agility, adapting their enormous bodies to the constraints of cluttered vegetation and unstable swamp terrain. This precise coordination allowed predators to navigate fallen logs, submerged roots, and sticky peat with minimal energy loss, a necessity for survival in a terrain where missteps could be fatal. Eyes adapted to dim light swept the environment, detecting subtle shifts in vegetation and water alike. These compound structures, far larger than those of most prey, allowed predators to hunt both during the diffuse daylight filtered through ferns and in the shadowed recesses of the swamp. Visual acuity combined with mechanoreception, enabling creatures like megarachni to integrate multiple sensory cues and track prey with astonishing precision, is a system finely tuned by millions of years of evolutionary pressure. Spines and ridges along the carapace absorbed the impact of struggle, protecting vital organs from fatal strikes. Fossilized specimens show evidence of repair and remodeling, suggesting that predatory encounters were frequent and often violent. Even for apex hunters, survival required resilience. Armored exoskeletons mitigated injury while permitting flexibility, allowing predators to continue hunting despite repeated clashes with prey or rivals. Muscles coiled and released with careful economy, conserving energy while preparing for sudden, explosive movement. Long hours of waiting in ambush were punctuated by brief but powerful strikes, a pattern that also minimized predation risk from rivals while maximizing efficiency. Giant arthropods relied on these energy-conserving strategies to navigate the high metabolic demands imposed by size and activity, ensuring that gigantism remained a viable advantage rather than a liability. As twilight descended over the swamp, certain giant predators shifted their hunting patterns to the dimming hours, exploiting low-light conditions that reduced competition and evaded detection by diurnal rivals. Fossilized trackways and comparison with modern analogues suggest that some arthropods actively alternated between night and day hunting, using temperature gradients, humidity, and subtle environmental cues to optimize foraging efficiency. This temporal niche partitioning allowed multiple predators to coexist in dense swamp habitats, reducing direct conflict while expanding the diversity of prey targeted across the 24-hour cycle. In the quiet expanse of flooded depressions, giant predators exploited water as both highway and hunting ground. Limbs adapted for swimming, paired with hydrodynamic body shapes, allowed megarachni and contemporaneous arthropods to glide silently toward unsuspecting prey. Fossil evidence of flattened abdominal segments and paddle-like appendages suggests these predators could maneuver with precision, ambushing both surface-dwelling insects and smaller aquatic arthropods. Their ability to transition between water and land environments gave them unprecedented versatility, making the swamp a three-dimensional hunting arena where vigilance in all directions was essential. A faint tremor through moss and leaf litter could announce the approach of prey, triggering a predator's rapid response. Specialized sensory hairs and mechanoreceptors, lining limbs and body segments, detected vibrations with exquisite sensitivity, complementing vision in the dimly lit swamp. Some predatory arthropods likely also employed chemoreception, sensing chemical traces in water or soil to locate prey or mark territory. These adaptations illustrate that hunting success depended not only on size or strength, but on acute environmental awareness, a combination of perception and strategy honed over evolutionary time. Rival hunters patrolled overlapping territories where size, speed, and strategy determined dominance. Encounters between similarly sized predators often ended with displays of strength, strategic retreats, or precise targeting of limbs rather than full-body clashes. These interactions structured access to key hunting grounds, pools, and sunlit patches, creating a layered hierarchy that influenced the behaviors of smaller arthropods throughout the swamp. Not all giant predators relied on the same prey, and their morphology reflects a spectrum of dietary specialization. While Megarachne favored aquatic insects and smaller arthropods, terrestrial hunters targeted large millipede-like creatures, juvenile insects, or even scavenged carrion when opportunity arose. Fossil evidence of damaged exoskeletons and bite marks indicates selective predation, with jaw and limb adaptations closely matching the physical characteristics of preferred prey. This division of feeding strategies underscores the ecological sophistication of the Carboniferous, where gigantism did not simply mean size, but the ability to exploit ecological niches with precision and efficiency. Even amidst the dense complexity of the swamp, predator and prey were locked in a delicate, dynamic balance where survival demanded constant attention. Every motion, every pause, and every decision reflected the interplay between opportunity and danger, size and agility, oxygen, abundance, and metabolic need. These giant hunters shaped the ecology around them, forcing prey species to evolve defenses, behaviors, and strategies of their own. In this world, gigantism conferred both dominance and vulnerability, and life thrived through the intricate dance of predator and prey, where every shadow, ripple, and whispered movement could determine survival, revealing a carboniferous ecosystem of unparalleled drama, intelligence, and ingenuity. Exoskeleton armor and flight mechanics. Where beams of daylight pierced the dense carboniferous foliage, the true marvel of insect engineering becomes visible in each glinting carapace. Every ridge, every plate, and every seam tells a story of evolutionary ingenuity, where strength and lightness were carefully balanced to allow survival in a world dominated by both enormous predators and colossal prey. The exoskeletons of these giants were not merely protective shells. They were sophisticated frameworks that supported muscle attachment, facilitated movement, and distributed forces generated during flight and terrestrial locomotion. Across the sprawling thorax, ridges and plates formed a lattice capable of withstanding both internal muscular force and external predatory impact. Fossils reveal that the thickness of cuticle varied strategically, robust near joints and limb bases to absorb stress, yet thinner across broad surfaces to reduce weight. This differential reinforcement allowed insects like Meganeura to sustain their enormous body mass without sacrificing agility or endurance, a delicate balance between vulnerability and resilience sculpted over millions of years. Embedded within the exoskeletal segments, layers of chitin were arranged to distribute mechanical stress in precise patterns, allowing giant insects to endure both the force of their own weight and the impact of collisions with vegetation. Fossil studies show that ridges and corrugations along the exoskeleton acted as natural reinforcement beams, channeling stress away from critical joints while preventing cracks from propagating. This architectural ingenuity allowed enormous insects to climb, crawl, or launch into flight without risking structural failure, illustrating a balance between mass, strength, and flexibility rarely matched in modern arthropods. Veins in the wings traced intricate networks reminiscent of architectural blueprints, distributing stress and enhancing aerodynamic efficiency. The venation patterns were not random. Cross veins, nodal points, and reinforced tracheal channels combined to prevent buckling during rapid wing beats. Fossilized wings indicate that these structures could flex and twist subtly, optimizing lift while mitigating the risk of mechanical failure. This precision enabled flight across dense forests, over swampy waters, and even in turbulent air currents that would overwhelm smaller, less structurally sophisticated insects. Even the largest wings had to be managed efficiently when insects rested or moved through dense forest understories. Fossil evidence indicates that hinge structures at the wing base permitted complex folding, reducing exposure to damage while conserving energy. Certain vein patterns may have acted like tension cables, supporting the wing during extension and allowing controlled flexing during gliding. This combination of folding mechanics and structural reinforcement enabled insects to navigate tight spaces, ambush prey, or evade predators without sacrificing the aerodynamic advantages of enormous wingspans. Molting cycles reveal a hidden choreography as soft exoskeletons hardened into resilient armor, preparing the insect for both flight and terrestrial navigation. Each molt was a perilous process, during which the insect temporarily lost its protective shell. Yet these events also allowed growth and repair of damaged tissues. Fossil evidence of successive molts shows progressive reinforcement of critical structures, including thoracic ridges, wing bases, and limb joints, demonstrating a dynamic adaptation to environmental pressures and the mechanical demands of gigantism. Each joint shows subtle gradations in thickness, balancing strength with flexibility to allow precise limb articulation under massive loads. Fossils suggest that even the heaviest segments retain sufficient mobility to manipulate food, burrow, or grasp perches during flight and terrestrial activity. Muscles anchored to these exoskeletal segments were arranged to maximize leverage and minimize energy expenditure, allowing repeated bursts of movement without catastrophic fatigue, a crucial adaptation for navigating dense forests and avoiding predatory threats. Wing beat frequency, influenced by size, air density, and muscle attachment, dictated maneuverability in environments dense with vegetation. Large insects like Meganeura likely used a combination of slow, powerful strokes and brief glides to conserve energy while maintaining aerial control. The interplay between wing length, mass, and atmospheric conditions created natural limitations, yet evolutionary refinements ensured that these giants could hunt, evade predators, and patrol territories with astonishing efficiency, demonstrating the fine-tuned balance between structure and function. Carved into ancient surfaces, fossil impressions capture fine details, microtrichia, and vein nodes that reduce turbulence and enhance lift during gliding or hovering. These microscopic adaptations may have functioned like modern aircraft spoilers, stabilizing airflow and providing subtle adjustments mid-flight. The combination of macro-scale wing architecture with micro-scale structural modifications illustrates the layered sophistication of Carboniferous insect engineering, where every scale and ridge contributed to survival, efficiency, and dominance in the skies above dense forests. Evolutionary pressures shaped a harmony between predator avoidance, energy efficiency, and mechanical resilience, visible in every segment and appendage. The exoskeleton was not merely armor against attack, it was a living interface between the insect and its environment. A system integrating sensory input, muscular control, and structural stability. Predation, competition, and oxygen availability all drove adaptations, sculpting wings, limbs, and body armor into functional masterpieces capable of supporting life at the extreme limits of size. In Carboniferous wetlands, the balance between body mass and oxygen availability placed physical limits on size, making these adaptations both extraordinary and delicate. As oxygen levels rose during the Carboniferous, insects could grow larger, but even the most optimized exoskeletons and wings faced mechanical and metabolic constraints. Fossil evidence of slightly malformed wing veins and joint wear suggests that gigantism carried inherent risks, requiring continual adaptation and precise structural design to ensure that flight, mobility, and survival remained possible in a challenging ecosystem. Throughout the labyrinthine Carboniferous ecosystems, the engineering of exoskeletons and wings allowed life to flourish, yet hinted at vulnerabilities awaiting environmental change. Each armored segment, each flexing vein, each microscale ridge represents the pinnacle of a delicate balance between biology and physics. With such engineering perfected, insects could reproduce, forage, and navigate their dense worlds with unparalleled competence. Yet the story of their dominance is tempered by the realization that even the most extraordinary adaptations could not protect them indefinitely from the shifting forces of climate, oxygen, and ecological upheaval. The dance of reproduction and life cycles. From the dim undergrowth, life began anew, as eggs nestled in mossy detritus or sunlit clearings prepared the next generation of giants. Each clutch represented a delicate negotiation with the environment, where temperature, humidity, and proximity to water determined the likelihood of survival. Fossil evidence suggests that Meganeura and Arthropods selected oviposition sites that minimized predation while optimizing growth conditions, a testament to behavioral sophistication rarely attributed to insects of this era. Some fossils suggest that the eggs of giant Carboniferous insects had specialized surface textures or microstructures that prevented desiccation and fungal growth in humid swamp environments. These adaptations would have been critical for survival in microhabitats where water levels fluctuated daily. The shell composition likely included additional layers of chitin or protein matrices, reinforcing them against predation or microbial attack. Such fine structural engineering at the earliest life stage ensured that gigantism could be sustained across generations, linking physiology, environmental pressures, and evolutionary success. Minute yet resilient, the first larvae emerged with anatomical features perfectly tuned to navigate waterlogged soils and decaying vegetation. Their segmented bodies allowed for flexibility through root tangles and dense leaf litter, while primitive tracheal networks supported gas exchange in microoxic environments. Even at a fraction of their adult size, these juveniles exhibited remarkable adaptations, including clawed appendages for gripping substrates and early exoskeletal reinforcement that would protect them during vulnerable molting phases. Larvae were not passive consumers, but active participants in the ecosystem, displaying niche specialization that reduced competition with adults and other species. Some burrowed in decomposing plant matter, extracting nutrients from cellulose-rich tissues, while others may have hunted small invertebrates or scavenged in waterlogged soils. This division of ecological roles ensured efficient energy transfer and allowed multiple life stages to coexist in the same habitat. Fossilized gut contents and trace evidence indicate that these feeding strategies contributed directly to growth rates and survivability, revealing a sophisticated integration of behavior, morphology, and environmental opportunity. Not only size, but also the successive reinforcement of exoskeletal segments marked growth, reflecting the pressures of an oxygen-rich world. Molting cycles were frequent yet carefully timed, allowing larvae to incrementally expand their bodies without jeopardizing mobility or exposing themselves to predation. Fossilized exuviae reveal progressive thickening of thoracic and abdominal plates, illustrating how developmental biology and environmental opportunity converge to support eventual gigantism. Mating flights and ritual displays demonstrated behavioral complexity, revealing that even colossal insects relied on delicate communication and environmental cues. Male Meganeura, for instance, may have engaged in aerial displays to signal fitness, negotiating the challenges of flight mechanics under their massive wingspans. These interactions were not mere spectacles. They ensured genetic diversity and the propagation of traits critical for survival, including wing strength, exoskeletal resilience, and oxygen efficiency. Each oviposition site was carefully chosen, balancing protection from predators, proximity to food sources, and microclimatic conditions. In swampy regions, eggs were deposited near decaying logs and water margins, providing both moisture and shelter. In drier clearings, insects exploited shaded ferns or lycopsid bases to reduce desiccation risk. This spatial strategy highlights the intricate relationship between reproductive behavior and habitat structure, demonstrating that life at this scale was always a negotiation with the environment. Larvae exhibited surprising mobility, burrowing through root networks and exploiting niche microhabitats inaccessible to larger competitors. Fossilized trackways show traces of early locomotion, suggesting deliberate paths through detritus and waterlogged soil. These movements not only aided feeding, but also reduced competition and exposure to predation, illustrating a level of ecological awareness embedded in morphology and behavior from the earliest life stages. The rhythm of molting synchronized with seasonal variations, ensuring that metabolic demands matched oxygen availability and nutrient abundance. Oxygen-rich periods allowed larvae to expand rapidly, reinforcing exoskeletal structures and developing wing buds that would later support flight. Conversely, periods of lower oxygen or drought likely slowed growth, forcing larvae to conserve energy and adjust behavior. Such cyclical adaptation demonstrates the intimate coupling of life cycles with environmental parameters in the Carboniferous. The delicate engineering essential for survival at all stages of life is evident in fossilized juvenile exoskeletons and wing buds. Wing development, in particular, was incremental. Nascent veins and membranes formed progressively, supported by musculature and reinforced at hinge points, ensuring that early flight attempts did not compromise structural integrity. The complexity of these adaptations underscores the evolutionary pressure to synchronize development physiology, and morphology in an environment where the largest predators and harsh conditions demanded constant vigilance. Intense selective pressures arose from predation on eggs and larvae, driving both chemical and physical defenses in the earliest stages of life. Some species may have produced toughened egg coatings or secreted deterrent chemicals to reduce vulnerability, while larvae employed cryptic coloration, burrowing, or rapid retreat to avoid detection. These strategies reveal that gigantism was not solely an adult phenomenon, but a lifelong negotiation with risk, where survival depended on mastering both anatomy and behavior from the moment of emergence. The success of reproduction determined which giants endured within the vast interplay of environment and biology, foreshadowing the eventual challenges imposed by climatic and ecological upheaval. The life cycles of Meganeura, Arthropods, and other enormous insects were tightly bound to oxygen levels, habitat density, and seasonal cycles, ensuring that every stage, from egg to larva to adult, maximized the opportunity for survival. Each generation embodied the convergence of physiology, environment, and evolutionary strategy, setting the stage for a world where size, strength, and cunning coexisted delicately with vulnerability, reminding us that even the most awe-inspiring adaptations were ultimately at the mercy of the shifting Carboniferous landscape. The Carboniferous climate machine, the swamp, scorched by a relentless sun, exhaled moisture in a constant, shimmering haze, saturating the air with oxygen that fueled the physiology of the largest insects in history. Thick humidity clung to every leaf and frond, creating microclimates where Meganeura and other giant species could maneuver with astonishing precision despite their immense wingspans. Tracheal networks expanded, delivering oxygen efficiently to massive flight muscles, while evaporative cooling allowed insects to regulate body temperature during prolonged flights. Even subtle variations in humidity could alter flight behavior, predation, and energy expenditure, revealing a delicate interplay between atmospheric conditions and the daily lives of these airborne titans. Rainfall carved rivulets and deep channels across the forest floor, reshaping habitats and delivering nutrient-rich sediment to waterlogged soils where larvae and small arthropods thrived. Seasonal flooding created corridors connecting isolated ponds, expanding the range for oviposition and dispersal while temporarily submerging predator and prey alike. Fossilized impressions show evidence of larval movement and feeding along these waterways, suggesting that hydrological cycles structured both competition and survival. Each storm was both a blessing and a threat, replenishing resources while creating turbulence, erosion, and obstacles that challenged flight, burrowing, and reproductive behavior across every life stage of the Carboniferous giants. Oxygen saturation reached levels estimated at 35%, far exceeding modern concentrations, allowing muscles to deliver extraordinary power while supporting gigantism. Wing structures in Meganeura displayed reinforced veins and articulated joints that resisted bending under enormous aerodynamic loads. Tracheal systems expanded into dense networks, facilitating oxygen diffusion to extremities during intense activity. Elevated oxygen also influenced metabolic rates, allowing prolonged flights, rapid predation, and efficient thermoregulation. Fossil evidence suggests that these atmospheric conditions directly affected body size limits, and even minor fluctuations could alter survival chances. Life at this scale became a continuous negotiation between physiology, environmental abundance, and the physical constraints imposed by gravity and air density. Temperature gradients across canopy, mid-story, and understory layers created microhabitats that insects exploited with behavioral and physiological sophistication. Some species specialized in sun-drenched clearings for hunting or mating flights, while others remained in cooler, shaded zones to conserve energy and avoid desiccation. Temperature variations also dictated molting cycles, larval development, and reproductive timing, creating a complex network of seasonally dependent behaviors. Fossilized remains, including wing positions and resting postures, indicate that insects modulated their activity to align with these thermal microclimates. Survival depended on reading subtle environmental cues, a delicate dance between adaptation, microhabitat selection, and the relentless forces of heat and moisture. Evaporating pools revealed mineral deposits and exposed early drought conditions, even in a world renowned for its wetness. Insects and larvae relied on consistent moisture for feeding, molting, and reproduction. Yet temporary desiccation demanded resilience and behavioral flexibility. Fossilized trackways and burrow patterns suggest larvae migrated towards saturated areas, seeking refuge from drying soils. Egg placement strategies also reflect an awareness of these microenvironmental changes, as overposition sites were selected to balance protection, hydration, and nutrient availability. Such adaptations ensured survival through fluctuating water levels and highlight the intimate link between hydrology, microclimate, and the persistence of gigantism among Carboniferous insects. Wildfires sparked by lightning raced across the canopy and leaf litter, transforming swathes of forest into ash and smoke while testing the endurance of all creatures below. Some giant insects sought refuge in moist understories or submerged in waterlogged soils, avoiding lethal heat and desiccation. Charred plant fossils and soot layers indicate that these fires occurred frequently enough to influence habitat structure, succession, and nutrient cycles. The need to respond to fire created selective pressures for mobility, burrowing behaviors, and rapid escape responses, while also shaping population dynamics, reproductive timing, and even community composition within these dense, oxygen-rich forests. Floodwaters that rose with the seasons expanded swamps into continuous networks of water and vegetation, creating dispersal pathways for eggs, larvae, and adults alike. Nutrient redistribution during these floods enhanced plant growth, supporting higher insect biomass and complex food webs. Simultaneously, rising water levels presented challenges. Eggs risked drowning, larvae required strategic burrowing, and adults had to navigate turbulent currents or relocate prey. Fossilized sediment layers reveal patterns of repeated inundation, indicating that these dynamic hydrological events were critical for population connectivity and survival. The interplay of abundance and risk shaped life cycles, behavior, and the evolution of gigantism across multiple generations. Clouds hung heavy with vapor, moving slowly to cast shifting shadows that guided flight, foraging, and thermoregulation. Light intensity influenced hunting efficiency, mate selection, and predator avoidance, subtly shaping evolutionary trajectories. Observations of fossilized resting postures suggest that insects adjusted wing positions and body orientation in response to changing light conditions. These daily fluctuations created a living map of opportunities and threats, integrating atmospheric dynamics into behavioral decision-making. Such sensitivity to subtle environmental cues demonstrates that gigantism required not only physical adaptations, but also acute ecological awareness, where survival hinged on reading the movements of both air and sunlight. Atmospheric shifts, recorded in fossilized plant stomata, sediment cores, and isotopic data, reveal a climate in constant flux. Humidity, oxygen, and temperature varied across years, forcing organisms to adapt quickly or face mortality. These fluctuations dictated metabolic efficiency, reproductive success, and body size potential. Fossil evidence indicates that oxygen levels influenced molting frequency, growth rates, and wing development, showing a direct connection between climate and physiological potential. Life in the Carboniferous swamps was therefore a continuous dialogue with the atmosphere, where evolutionary success depended as much on responding to subtle environmental cues as on raw physical adaptations. Each climatic pulse storm, drought, flood, or fire reminded organisms that gigantism came with risk as well as opportunity. Elevated oxygen, humidity, and temperature provided the canvas for extraordinary size and ecological dominance. Yet even minor disruptions could imperil entire populations. Behavioral flexibility, habitat selection, and reproductive timing became as critical as body mass or wing strength. Fossil evidence of burrows, resting postures, and trackways reflects the constant negotiation between opportunity and danger, illustrating that survival depended on synchronizing life cycles with environmental rhythms. The Carboniferous climate machine was both enabler and arbiter, shaping life in ways that combined abundance with vulnerability. Even as swamps teemed with ecological possibility, extreme events tested resilience at every scale. Lightning-induced fires, flash floods, and seasonal desiccation imposed selective pressures on behavior, physiology, and life cycles alike. The largest insects could soar through oxygen-rich air, navigate flooded forests, and exploit abundant prey, yet each advantage carried the shadow of risk. Climate was a master architect, designing both the opportunities for gigantism and the hazards that threatened it. Survival depended on reading the environment, responding to its pulses, and integrating physiology, behavior, and reproductive strategy into a coherent response to an ever-changing, humid, and perilous world. Fire and flood, catastrophes of the swamps. Cracking arcs of lightning split the humid sky, igniting the towering ferns and lycopsids in sudden bursts of flame that raced across the canopy with terrifying speed. The dry fronds at higher levels acted as kindling, while lower vegetation smouldered slowly, creating a patchwork of fire intensity. Fossil evidence shows charred leaf and stem fragments, revealing that these events were neither rare nor uniformly destructive. The largest insects reacted instantly, leveraging flight and mobility to escape, while smaller arthropods sought burrows and waterlogged refuges. Fire sculpted the landscape, creating gaps for colonization and simultaneously imposing lethal selection pressures that shaped physiology and behavior across species. Thick smoke snaked through the forest canopy, muffling sound and obscuring vision, altering predator-prey dynamics for both winged hunters and ground dwellers. Oxygen-rich air mixed with particulate matter to form dense smog, reducing flight efficiency and creating thermally unstable pockets. Observations of fossilized wing positions suggest that insects adjusted postures during smoke events to maintain balance and conserve energy. Smoldering zones also increased ambient temperature locally, accelerating evaporation in exposed pools and challenging larvae dependent on moist microhabitats. Smoke thus acted as both obstacle and ecological signal, triggering behavioral adaptations that influenced hunting, mating, and dispersal within these giant insect populations. Moist soil pockets bubbled and steamed, offering temporary sanctuary to larvae and burrowing arthropods as intense heat pressed down from above. The saturated substratum prevented complete desiccation, maintaining hydration for critical developmental stages. Fossilized burrows and trackways indicate that species like Arthropleura could survive high temperatures by retreating below the surface, exploiting water retention and thermal insulation. These refuges also provided shelter from predators displaced by fire, creating ephemeral safe zones. Survival depended on microhabitat selection, timing, and physiological resilience, revealing how even in catastrophic conditions, the Carboniferous insects demonstrated complex interactions between environment, behavior, and morphological adaptation. Torrential runoff swept across the forest floor, lifting sediment, uprooting vegetation, and carrying eggs downstream in chaotic currents. Seasonal flooding restructured the swamp ecosystem, dispersing populations and connecting isolated habitats. Fossilized sediment layers capture evidence of high-energy events, showing rapid deposition of plant and animal remains. Larvae and juveniles faced both peril and opportunity, with floods opening new nutrient-rich territories, but also increasing predation risk. Adults adapted by choosing overpositioned sites strategically, avoiding vulnerable lowlands while exploiting elevated terrain for egg-laying. Flood dynamics directly influenced reproductive success, mobility, and population structure, reinforcing the intricate relationship between water and survival in these expansive ecosystems. Layers of charred detritus and ash tell a story of fire, frequency, and intensity, mapping ecological disruption across the landscape. Repeated burns created a mosaic of destruction and regrowth, influencing species distribution and food web dynamics. Nutrients released from combustion fostered rapid colonization by pioneer plants, which in turn provided habitat and food for herbivorous insects. Fossils reveal differential survival, with some populations thriving in post-fire environments while others were eliminated. These cyclical disturbances acted as evolutionary filters, selecting for rapid response, mobility, and adaptive flexibility, ultimately shaping the trajectory of gigantism and ecological dominance in these hyper-oxygenated swamps. Some insects adapted swiftly, anchoring themselves to submerged roots, hiding under leaf litter, or burrowing deep into the saturated ground. Behavioral plasticity complemented physiological traits, allowing species to endure both sudden inundation and extreme heat. Fossil trackways and preserved burrow structures suggest that escape responses were instinctively linked to environmental cues such as vibration, heat, or water level changes. Survival required integration of sensory input, muscular control, and spatial awareness, demonstrating cognitive and behavioral sophistication. These adaptations highlight how episodic catastrophes were not merely destructive, but also acted as drivers of evolutionary innovation, shaping morphology, locomotion, and life strategies. Rising floodwaters carved new channels, expanding aquatic habitats while fragmenting terrestrial corridors, creating opportunities and risks for dispersal. Eggs and larvae were transported downstream, sometimes reaching entirely new ecological niches. Fossil evidence of sediment-laden swamps indicates repeated inundation patterns, which affected species composition and population connectivity. Some arthropods exploited these transient waterways for rapid movement and feeding, while others faced heightened predation from displaced aquatic hunters. The cyclical nature of flooding reinforced the selective pressures favoring both mobility and adaptability, demonstrating that environmental extremes could both challenge and enhance the persistence of giant insect species across generations. Extreme events accelerated life cycles, prompting early molting, rapid maturation, and strategic overposition to preserve the next generation. Fossilized exuvii suggest shortened larval stages and staggered hatching, enabling some individuals to survive temporal windows of safety. This temporal plasticity allowed species to synchronize reproductive efforts with periods of low environmental stress, while avoiding the lethal phases of fire and flood. Seasonal variability in resource availability further shaped developmental timing, ensuring that growth, energy allocation, and reproductive output were optimized in a volatile ecosystem. Life history strategies were thus inseparable from environmental rhythm, integrating physiology, behavior, and ecology into a survival framework. Predators and prey navigated transformed terrain, recalibrating hunting strategies and avoiding hazards in a constantly shifting environment. Fires and floods altered cover, visibility, and resource distribution, forcing both giant dragonflies and terrestrial arthropods to adapt. Fossilized evidence of bite marks, mandible morphology, and preserved body positions suggests predation became opportunistic during environmental upheaval. Both herbivores and carnivores modified movement patterns, seeking safe passage or ambush points in the altered landscape. These interactions demonstrate that environmental catastrophes reshaped food webs, predator-prey dynamics, and competition, influencing evolution in ways that were both immediate and long-term. In the aftermath, survivors reshaped communities, demonstrating resilience forged in fire and flood, the ultimate test of Carboniferous gigantism. Nutrient pulses from ash and sediment encouraged rapid regrowth of ferns, lycopsids, and early trees, creating new niches. Fossilized insect assemblages show that species capable of rapid colonization, burrowing, or aquatic refuge flourished, while less adaptable forms declined. This constant ecological turnover favored versatility, cognitive acuity, and morphological innovation. Observing the fossil record reveals the interplay between environmental stress and evolutionary response, highlighting how episodic catastrophes functioned as crucibles for selection, producing the final expressions of gigantism before climatic and ecological shifts curtailed these forms. Flash floods, lightning strikes, and wildfires turned the Carboniferous swamps into arenas of trial where survival was earned through adaptation and resilience. The largest insects could leverage oxygen, abundance, mobility, and physiological specialization, yet they remained vulnerable to sudden destruction. Fossil layers, sediment deposits, and preserved behaviors provide a detailed record of life negotiating catastrophe. These extreme events forged the selective pressures that honed both predator and prey, driving reproductive timing, behavioral flexibility, and morphological sophistication. In this crucible of fire and water, gigantism was simultaneously a triumph and a vulnerability, revealing the delicate balance that defined Carboniferous ecosystems. The shadow of emerging vertebrates, shadows of crawling amphibians stretched across the mossy forest floor, signaling a new and persistent danger for the giant arthropods that had long dominated the Carboniferous swamps. Fossil evidence from early temnospondyle trackways reveals the systematic exploration of swampy terrain, suggesting these vertebrates hunted both on land and near water margins. The sheer size of some amphibians allowed them to challenge even the largest insects, like Arthropods, which relied on ground cover and vegetation to evade predation. This marked the beginning of a dynamic interplay where behavior, physiology, and vigilance determined survival in a world now shared with vertebrate hunters. Limbs and claws carved irregular trails through ferns and lycopsids, demonstrating early stalking strategies that combined stealth with opportunistic bursts of speed. Trackway patterns suggest amphibians could navigate uneven terrain while coordinating attacks on smaller or slower arthropods. Fossilized exuviae of Arthropods and smaller insects found near these tracks hint at the effectiveness of these predatory tactics. Meanwhile, flying insects like Meganeura altered flight paths and hunting zones to avoid aerial encounters with amphibians capable of climbing low branches. These adaptations reveal an ecological pressure that was constant and localized, shaping both behavior and habitat selection across arthropod species. Teeth marks and puncture wounds preserved in fossilized exoskeletons provide a direct window into predation, capturing moments of ancient struggle. Analysis of mandibular impressions indicates repeated targeting of soft body regions, suggesting early vertebrates were selective and efficient hunters. Fossil assemblages reveal the spatial clustering of these injuries, implying that insect populations experienced uneven mortality depending on habitat use. The selective pressure exerted by vertebrate hunters encouraged rapid behavioral responses, such as adopting nocturnal or crepuscular activity patterns. These predator-prey interactions, preserved in the fossil record, demonstrate the earliest complex relationships between arthropods and emerging terrestrial vertebrates. Some dragonflies and millipede giants responded by shifting activity to hours when vertebrate predators were less active, exploiting temporal refuges to forage and reproduce. Meganeura, for example, may have flown higher in the canopy or timed hunting runs during the dimming twilight, reducing encounter rates with early amphibians. Fossil evidence of resting wing positions and preserved perches suggests deliberate avoidance behaviors. Juvenile stages of terrestrial arthropods were especially vulnerable, with survival rates linked to microhabitat selection and behavioral timing. These adjustments reflect an evolving ecological dialogue, where insects not only reacted to vertebrate presence, but actively anticipated predation pressures. Temporary burrows, elevated root tangles, and submerged crevices became critical refuges, providing shelter from both terrestrial and semi-aquatic hunters. Fossilized burrows of Arthropleura and related species indicate repeated use, suggesting that structural complexity and depth were essential for survival. Such refuges allowed prolonged periods of inactivity during high predation risk, while enabling rapid emergence for feeding or reproduction. This spatial strategy complemented behavioral adaptations, creating a layered defense system. The interplay between environmental features and vertebrate pressures demonstrates that survival in these swamps required both physical and cognitive sophistication in the largest insects. Early reptiles introduced new challenges, adding climbing abilities, rapid strikes, and increased mobility to the predatory landscape. Fossils of early diapsids indicate limb morphology adapted for both terrestrial pursuit and partial arboreal navigation. Threatening insects that previously relied on vertical escape, these predators could access previously safe niches, forcing insects to reconsider overposition sites, foraging zones, and flight paths. The evolution of these vertebrates coincided with continued hyperoxygenation and habitat expansion, creating a complex environment where arthropod gigantism was constrained by emergent predation pressures as well as environmental extremes. Fossil assemblages reflect shifts in insect population densities, highlighting the selective removal of individuals most vulnerable to vertebrate predation. Comparative analysis shows decreased numbers of heavily armored but slow-moving species in open areas, while agile, burrow-capable forms persisted. This selective filtering affected both genetic diversity and behavioral traits, favoring individuals with heightened sensory awareness, faster reaction times, and strategic habitat selection. Vertebrate predation, in combination with environmental challenges like fire and flood, amplified selective pressures accelerating evolutionary refinement of behaviors that had previously been driven primarily by intraspecific competition and environmental adaptation. Predation pressure intertwined with environmental stresses to influence insect life cycles, accelerating molting, reproduction, and dispersal. Fossilized exuviae indicate staggered hatching and accelerated juvenile development, suggesting that survival depended on synchronizing vulnerable life stages with periods of reduced vertebrate activity. Insects optimized reproductive output by selecting oviposition sites out of reach of amphibians or reptiles, demonstrating intricate life history strategies. These dynamics exemplify the delicate balance between growth, reproduction, and survival in an ecosystem where size, speed, and timing are equally critical. Evolution favored a holistic integration of behavior, morphology, and environmental awareness. Morphological adaptations emerged in response to this new selective landscape, including reinforced exoskeletons, spines, and sensory enhancements. Specimens of Arthropleura and other ground-dwelling arthropods show thickened cuticles and segmented spines, likely evolved to deter vertebrate attacks. Compound eyes of aerial insects indicate selective pressure for heightened visual acuity, enhancing detection of approaching predators. Sensory hairs, antennae, and other mechanoreceptors allowed arthropods to anticipate disturbances, improving escape success. These innovations, documented in the fossil record, demonstrate how biological architecture evolved under the dual influence of environmental extremes and vertebrate predation. The Carboniferous swamps became a stage where arthropods had to balance gigantism with vulnerability, responding to both environmental catastrophes and the rising threat of vertebrate hunters. Fossil evidence of population decline, behavioral shifts, and morphological change shows that even the largest insects were constrained by the presence of amphibians and early reptiles. Yet, these pressures also fostered ecological innovation, refining life strategies and enhancing resilience. In this delicate interplay, gigantism remained both an advantage and a liability, ultimately shaping the trajectory of arthropod evolution and setting the stage for the eventual transition to smaller forms as vertebrate diversity expanded. Decline of the giants. As the enormous forms of ancient arthropods faded from view, subtle reductions in size became apparent across fossil layers, telling a story of incremental change rather than sudden disappearance. Meganeura, once spanning wings of over 70 centimeters, gradually gave way to smaller odonates with limited aerial reach, while Arthropleura's colossal body segments contracted over generations. Geological strata preserve the subtle differences in limb thickness, exoskeletal robustness, and body length, reflecting environmental pressures and predation challenges. These shifts mark a delicate dance between physiology and ecological opportunity, revealing that gigantism, while spectacular, was never indefinitely sustainable in a dynamic Carboniferous world of fluctuating oxygen, predators, and habitat availability. Skeletal fragments and exoskeletal impressions reveal a gradual simplification of body structures previously adapted for extreme gigantism. Detailed analyses of fossilized wing veins and sclerites show narrower supporting structures, suggesting both reduced flight capabilities and lighter energy demands. Mandibles, antennae, and sensory appendages also display measurable changes, pointing to adaptations that favored agility over sheer size. Each reduction illustrates a balancing act, conserving structural strength while minimizing metabolic cost. These anatomical modifications were not uniform, appearing first in some populations and later in others, indicating a staggered decline influenced by local habitat conditions, resource availability, and predator pressure across the sprawling swamps. Oxygen fluctuations, inferred from sedimentary and geochemical records, imposed physiological constraints on the largest species, limiting growth potential and pushing gigantism toward an ecological ceiling. Coal deposits and isotopic data suggest periods of reduced atmospheric oxygen coinciding with declines in maximum body sizes. Tracheal systems that once supported enormous wingspans now struggled to supply sufficient oxygen to the largest tissues, enforcing a metabolic bottleneck. Even minor deviations in oxygen concentration could significantly affect flight endurance, molting success, and reproductive output, demonstrating that environmental chemistry exerted a profound influence on the evolutionary trajectory of these insects, constraining their dominance despite the abundance of food and habitat. Vertebrate predation continued to shape populations, selectively removing slow or exposed individuals and favoring smaller, more agile forms capable of evading amphibians and early reptiles. Trackways and coprolites indicate frequent encounters between giant arthropods and emerging tetrapods, documenting both predation events and behavioral responses. Defensive adaptations, such as thicker exoskeletons or cryptic coloration, offered temporary protection, yet could not fully compensate for reduced speed or maneuverability. These interactions introduced selective pressures that favored smaller adult sizes, more efficient locomotion, and behavioral plasticity, revealing an evolutionary arms race where gigantism, once an advantage, became a liability in the presence of new terrestrial predators. Changes in habitat, including the shrinkage of swampy refuges, intensified pressures on remaining giant insects. Fluctuating water tables, sediment accumulation, and plant community shifts fragmented once continuous habitats, forcing populations into isolated pockets. Limited space reduced foraging efficiency and mating opportunities while increasing competition. Fossilized root mats and floodplain layers suggest that microhabitats provided only temporary shelter, with repeated inundation or desiccation events creating an ongoing cycle of mortality and survival. These environmental constraints, combined with predation and physiological limits to accelerate the decline of giants, illustrating that ecological fragmentation was as decisive a factor as predation or oxygen availability. Fossilized larval forms suggest that reproductive strategies adjusted, with faster growth cycles and smaller adult sizes becoming advantageous in the new environmental regime. Evidence of shortened instar stages, reduced egg size, and earlier maturation appears in multiple insect lineages, indicating a shift toward maximizing reproductive output under constrained conditions. These adaptations allowed species to maintain population viability despite declining body size and habitat loss. Larval ecology, previously adapted to large, stable swamp pools, evolved to exploit smaller, water-filled niches and detritus layers, demonstrating that the life cycle itself was an arena for evolutionary innovation in the face of multifaceted pressures. Isolated microhabitats, such as elevated root mats or submerged detritus, offered temporary havens, allowing remnants of giant species to persist. Fossil evidence shows pockets of larger individuals surviving where predators were sparse or oxygen levels remained higher, providing a glimpse into the patchwork nature of ecological survival. These refugia were crucial for maintaining genetic diversity, preserving traits that had enabled gigantism for millions of years. Yet, they also highlight the fragility of persistence, as even slight changes in water chemistry, vegetation, or predation could render a sanctuary uninhabitable, underscoring the delicate balance between survival and extinction in the Carboniferous world. The decline of gigantism coincided with diversification among smaller arthropods, filling niches once dominated by larger forms. As mega-insects receded, smaller odonates, myriapods, and arachnids exploited available resources, demonstrating the rapid adaptability of arthropod lineages. These replacements were not mere successors. They carried evolutionary innovations in wing articulation, sensory perception, and locomotion that reflected lessons learned from the giants' former dominance. Fossil assemblages reveal a proliferation of specialized forms, indicating that extinction was a driver of innovation, and the legacy of gigantism persisted indirectly through the evolutionary opportunities it created for smaller, more versatile species. Morphological trends show streamlined exoskeletons, reduced wingspans, and sensory adaptations optimized for survival in a changing world. The reduction of structural weight improved energy efficiency and mobility, while eyes and antennae evolved enhanced sensitivity to detect both prey and predators in fragmented habitats. Some lineages retained vestiges of former gigantism, such as robust mandibles or elongated segments, but these traits were increasingly balanced with efficiency rather than scale. This mosaic of adaptation underscores the dual pressures of inheritance and environment, revealing how organisms negotiate survival when prior dominance is no longer sustainable. Yet functional optimization remains critical for persistence. Even as the giants vanished, their legacy persisted in evolutionary strategies, informing the resilience and adaptability of arthropods for millions of years. Modern analogues, from dragonflies to millipedes, retain elements of the Carboniferous blueprint: wing structures, exoskeletal patterns, and behavioral strategies that echo the challenges of their ancestors. The fossil record serves as both a cautionary tale and an inspiration, demonstrating that no adaptation is permanent, but knowledge encoded in morphology and behavior can shape future generations. By studying these ancient transitions, we see the enduring influence of past extremes on contemporary ecosystems, where size, physiology, and habitat continue to interact dynamically. Remnants adapted in isolated niches, hinting at evolutionary continuity that bridges the Carboniferous and subsequent periods. Fossilized populations in restricted wetlands, cave-like root systems, or peripheral swamps demonstrate survival strategies that allowed small pockets of larger species to persist temporarily, yet these pockets were ephemeral, serving as evolutionary laboratories where selective pressures refined traits for resilience rather than gigantism. As these giants faded from prominence, they left behind a world primed for diversification, innovation, and ecological experimentation, showing that the story of arthropods is one of adaptation, endurance, and transformation. Even when the largest forms can no longer dominate, survivors in miniature, the last Carboniferous giants. Within isolated root mats, the largest survivors clung to life, their massive exoskeletons now scaled down, yet still formidable in proportion to their immediate surroundings. These small refuges, hidden among peripheral swamps and pockets of detritus, offered both shelter and constraints, creating selective pressures that honed resilience rather than size. Fossilized remnants indicate that Meganeura and Arthropleura were capable of limited mobility in these microhabitats, their powerful mandibles and articulated legs repurposed for foraging and navigating tightly packed vegetation. Each movement was deliberate, optimized for energy conservation in oxygen-rich yet spatially restrictive environments, reflecting the intricate negotiation between physiology and habitat that allowed survival even as their era of dominance waned. Fossilized wings and mandibles reveal subtle compromises between size and efficiency. Meganeura, whose wingspan once stretched over 70 centimeters, appears in late Carboniferous deposits with reduced, reinforced veins, suggesting adjustments to maintain flight in denser vegetation while coping with fluctuating oxygen levels. Arthropods, once a titanic ground dweller, shows evidence of shorter body segments and a more compact thorax in surviving populations, indicating adaptations for maneuvering in narrow root tunnels and avoiding desiccation. These morphological changes exemplify the balance between maintaining the functional traits of giants and conforming to the ecological limitations imposed by shrinking habitats and the emergence of vertebrate predators. Microhabitats offered sanctuary, yet imposed strict behavioral demands on the remaining giants. The last populations of Arthropods relied on nocturnal activity and humidity-dependent foraging, reducing exposure to daytime predators and desiccation stress. Meganeura, constrained by canopy gaps, modified its flight patterns, using slow glides along sunlit corridors to conserve energy while avoiding aerial or arboreal threats. Observing fossil trackways alongside sedimentological evidence reveals how these insects restricted their movements to favorable microenvironments, demonstrating behavioral flexibility that complemented morphological downsizing. Survival depended not just on size or strength, but on the integration of behavior, physiology, and microclimate awareness. Reproductive strategies shifted, favoring rapid cycles and reduced energy investment in each offspring. Eggs were smaller, often deposited in moist soil or under decaying vegetation, protecting embryos from predation and environmental extremes. Larval stages were shortened yet specialized, emphasizing rapid growth in oxygen-rich pockets while maintaining the ability to navigate dense roots or flooded soils. This delicate balance between life cycle acceleration and developmental specialization ensured that, even as giant forms declined, populations could persist long enough to transmit advantageous traits to subsequent generations, seeding evolutionary continuity in smaller arthropods that would dominate future ecosystems. Interactions with early predators dictated the limits of survival for these populations. Amphibians and early reptiles, emerging as novel terrestrial hunters, exerted predation pressures that prevented any resurgence of gigantism. Fossil evidence of bite marks, disarticulated exoskeletons, and predation-induced mortality highlights the subtle but relentless influence of vertebrates on arthropod populations. These pressures fostered cryptic behaviors, burrowing tendencies, and nocturnal foraging, demonstrating that the giant's legacy was as much about adaptation to threat as about previous dominance, and that size alone could no longer guarantee survival in a rapidly diversifying Carboniferous ecosystem. Comparisons with smaller, contemporaneous arthropods reveal patterns of adaptation and trade-offs. While miniature insects exploited new ecological niches, surviving giants retained structural advantages, stronger mandibles, reinforced exoskeletons, and gliding capability that allowed them to outcompete smaller species in localized settings. Yet these advantages were highly context-dependent, providing dominance only in sheltered or resource-rich microhabitats. The juxtaposition of large and small forms illustrates the intricate dynamics of evolutionary pressures, where the triumph of gigantism in the past was supplanted by a flexible balance of efficiency, resilience, and environmental opportunism. Morphological vestiges hint at former grandeur, even as function prioritized endurance. Fossilized exoskeleton fragments reveal the retained articulation of leg segments and wing vein patterns, echoing ancestral capabilities while optimized for survival rather than aerial conquest. Meganeura's thoracic musculature, inferred from preserved sclerites, suggests maintained flight power, yet with reduced stamina, emphasizing short bursts and controlled glides over long-distance patrolling. Arthropleura's shortened abdomen preserved locomotor stability in confined tunnels, reflecting the same principle. Structural memory of gigantism adapted to a world where size had become both a privilege and a liability. Oxygen fluctuations constrained growth, shaping the physiology of the last giant forms. As atmospheric oxygen declined gradually toward the end of the Carboniferous, metabolic demands increased, favoring smaller body sizes to maintain efficiency. Evidence from respiratory spiracle morphology indicates a reduction in spiracle size and density, adjusting to decreased oxygen availability while preventing water loss in fluctuating swamp conditions. These physiological compromises underline the delicate interplay between environment and organism, where survival hinged on optimizing energy, maintaining hydration, and sustaining mobility despite the declining atmospheric support that had once enabled extraordinary gigantism. Genetic and ecological legacies persisted through minute lineages, guiding future evolution. Traits that allowed the largest insects to dominate efficient exoskeleton structures, versatile appendages, adaptive flight mechanics, and sophisticated sensory processing found echoes in smaller, more resilient arthropods that inherited their genetic blueprint. Modern dragonflies, centipedes, and millipedes retain structural and behavioral elements first honed in Carboniferous giants, demonstrating that evolutionary innovation does not vanish with the largest forms, but is transmitted, refined, and repurposed across epochs. Fossil comparisons show direct continuity, linking the grandeur of the past to the adaptability of present-day species. The story of these survivors closes the arc of gigantism, illustrating the balance between environment, physiology, and evolutionary potential. Each lingering population, whether clinging to a swamp edge or burrowing beneath dense roots, embodies a compromise between former dominance and adaptive necessity. Their decline was neither abrupt nor total, but a gradual rebalancing, where microhabitat specialization, reproductive efficiency, and predator avoidance became paramount. In preserving fragments of the giant forms, these last insects provide a living testament to the ingenuity of life, bridging the extremes of the Carboniferous with the biodiversity of subsequent eras, and leaving behind an enduring legacy in modern arthropods. The giant insect arms race. Tiny beams of golden light illuminated the movements of the last giants, where every hunting maneuver and evasive glide was measured against both opportunity and threat. Meganeura, with wingspans exceeding 70 centimeters, carved arcs through the humid air, scanning for smaller arthropods while simultaneously evading the reach of rival hunters. Fossilized wing impressions suggest precise control over lift and drag, allowing even the heaviest of insects to perform sudden turns, dives, and climbs that modern analogues cannot replicate. In these moments, physiology met physics, with wing vein structure, thoracic musculature, and body mass converging to produce remarkable aerial agility despite the constraints imposed by gigantism. Predators lurked not just above, but within the dense undergrowth, their presence moulding the behavior of prey before any physical contact occurred. Arthropleura, sprawling across the forest floor, followed detrital corridors and decaying logs with a deliberation that reflects an awareness of ambush potential. Fossil trackways show patterns of cautious weaving, pause and assess movements, and sudden bursts of speed, all evidence that survival depended on reading subtle environmental cues. The interplay of predator and prey created a feedback loop where each adaptation by one species directly pressured refinements in the other, accelerating evolutionary responses across generations. Mandibles and forelegs evolved in precise response to rivals, reflecting a selective pressure visible in the fossilized exoskeletons of successive generations. Megarachne, a massive aquatic predator, shows enlarged appendages and reinforced joints, optimized for grasping both prey and struggling competitors. In parallel, prey species developed armored segments and spiny projections to discourage attacks, a co-evolutionary dialogue etched in chitin. The balance of offense and defense was measured not only in size, but in the placement of spines, leverage points, and articulation angles, demonstrating how morphology itself became a weapon and shield in the Carboniferous arms race. Flight patterns adapted to the contours of tree canopies and flooded corridors, revealing an intimate dialogue between physiology and environment. Fossilized wing damage and preserved vein arrangements indicate that predators could maneuver in constrained spaces, using vertical and lateral sweeps to intercept unsuspecting prey. Meanwhile, prey species learned to exploit turbulent air currents, hovering in dense shade or darting through sunlit clearings to avoid detection. Each adaptation represented a compromise between energy efficiency, speed, and maneuverability, showing that size alone was insufficient for dominance. Sensory organs, from compound eyes to mechanoreceptors, intensified in function, granting split-second advantages in pursuit or evasion. Meganeura possessed eyes capable of high-resolution motion detection, enabling rapid responses to the flurry of smaller insects or rival hunters in complex aerial arenas. Vibrational sensors on the exoskeleton of ground-dwelling arthropods like Arthropleura allowed detection of approaching predators or conspecific competitors, effectively extending their perceptual reach beyond immediate sight. Evolutionary pressures sculpted these sensory systems to peak performance, ensuring that even colossal bodies could navigate the dense, predator-rich environment with precision. Competition within species added layers of complexity, with territory, mating, and resource access influencing both morphology and tactics. Male Meganeura, for instance, appear to have engaged in aerial contests over prime overposition sites, their wing strikes, mid-air maneuvers, and display patterns recorded in fossilized wing wear and scar marks. Similarly, large millipede-like species may have contested fungal-rich zones on the forest floor, with armored exoskeletons and spiny limbs facilitating dominance hierarchies. Such intraspecies competition compounded the selective pressures imposed by predators, creating multi-layered ecological challenges that accelerated the pace of adaptation. Fossilized trackways, wing impressions, and feeding scars reveal the iterative experimentation that characterized these evolutionary arms races. Trackways show alternating leg patterns that suggest speed bursts, followed by cautious pauses, implying that predators were constantly testing the limits of prey reaction. Wing impressions highlight subtle structural reinforcements, indicating that repeated aerial contests produce modifications in vein thickness, cross-sectional shape, and flex points. Feeding scars on preserved plant and animal material document repeated predation events, reinforcing the idea that interactions between hunter and hunted left a tangible imprint on morphology and behavior alike. Microhabitat specialization became a survival strategy, as species learned to exploit the niches least accessible to rivals and predators. Some giant insects foraged exclusively along waterlogged logs or clung to fern stalks just above floodlines, avoiding terrestrial predators while accessing rich food resources. Conversely, predators developed longer reach, extendable mandibles, or reinforced exoskeletons to penetrate these refuges. These fine-scale adaptations exemplify how spatial partitioning within forests, swamps, and canopy edges allowed multiple enormous species to coexist, each carving a living space dictated by both opportunity and risk. Reproductive timing shifted to synchronize with periods of resource abundance, demonstrating the interplay between life cycles and competitive pressures. Eggs, larval development, and molting cycles were closely aligned with seasonal fluctuations, maximizing the survival probability of the next generation. Fossilized oviposition sites and growth stage exoskeletons indicate that delays or mistimed reproduction could result in catastrophic losses, particularly when predation was high or flood disrupted forest floors. This coordination of life cycles with environmental rhythms highlights the intimate integration of physiology, ecology, and evolution in shaping the Carboniferous giant's persistence. In the delicate balance of predator and prey, adaptations accumulated, leaving a legacy evident in both the fossil record and the behavior of modern arthropods. From wing flexibility to armored segments, from heightened sensory perception to reproductive timing, each evolutionary response was both a triumph over immediate challenges and a preparation for future pressures. The story of these giants underscores the dynamic tension between size, environment, and survival, showing how extreme ecological pressures can drive rapid innovation. Their arms race was not merely a contest of strength, but a multifaceted negotiation of form, function, and opportunity, leaving a blueprint that resonates in contemporary ecosystems. From the flurries of prehistoric wings and sprawling exoskeletons, life learned the art of adaptation, setting the stage for a world where arthropods would continue to evolve, survive, and diversify long after the last Carboniferous giant faded from the skies and forest floors. Ecosystem architects, insects shaping the swamps. Shadows shifted across sunlit fronds as enormous wings swept past, scattering detritus that would seed future growth. The largest arthropods of the Carboniferous were not merely inhabitants of the swamp. They were active engineers, their movements sculpting both living and decomposing vegetation. Every landing, every scuttle through dense undergrowth redistributed spores, leaves, and decomposing plant matter, subtly altering patterns of light, moisture, and nutrient availability. Fossilized impressions show repeated trampling paths that compressed soil in predictable patterns, while their bodies left behind microscopic traces that enriched peat layers with chitinous material, ensuring that even in death, these insects contributed to ecological continuity. Giant exoskeletal forms moved through the damp canopy, burrowing and churning the soil while redistributing organic matter with each deliberate step. Arthropleura and its kin created networks of subterranean channels that aerated the swamp's saturated soils, promoting fungal colonization and microbial activity critical to nutrient cycling. Sediment analysis suggests these burrows were extensive, with overlapping layers reflecting both individual and generational activity. By disturbing the forest floor, these arthropods accelerated decomposition rates, releasing nitrogen and carbon compounds that would otherwise remain locked in plant matter. The interplay of movement and soil turnover reveals a constant negotiation between organism and environment, a dynamic that ultimately shaped plant growth and swamp topography. Waterlogged corridors bore the imprint of countless arthropod journeys, their paths shaping the hydrology of swamps over millennia. Trackways preserved in fine-grained silt demonstrate not only the size and gait of these giants, but also the directional flow of water and sediment around repeated travel routes. By compressing certain areas while leaving others open, Insects indirectly influence channel formation, pooling of seasonal rains, and sediment deposition patterns. This microengineering created variations in moisture and nutrient concentration that favored particular plant assemblages, revealing the profound, if often invisible, impact of these arthropods on ecosystem structure. Feeding patterns left unmistakable marks on fallen vegetation, accelerating decay and liberating nutrients that fueled unseen growth below. Fossil evidence shows partial consumption of leaf masses, spore-bearing stalks, and decaying wood by giant insects, indicating selective feeding strategies that balanced energy intake with ecosystem maintenance. These activities promoted microbial colonization, fostered fungal networks, and enhanced soil fertility, ultimately influencing which plant species could thrive in densely packed coal forests. Each bite was not merely survival. It was part of an ongoing dialogue between consumer and habitat, a continuous cycle of destruction and renewal that maintained ecological equilibrium. Leaf litter, spore beds, and fungal colonies reflected a constant dialogue between insect activity and forest floor dynamics. Layers of compressed organic material, rich in chitin remnants, demonstrate repeated arthropod traffic, creating microhabitats that supported invertebrates, amphibians, and early reptiles. In these corridors of decay and growth, nutrient hotspots emerged, producing patches of accelerated plant regeneration and fungal fruiting. Such interactions underscore the intricate connectivity between fauna and flora, revealing that even the largest insects functioned as catalysts of biodiversity, driving energy flow and species composition in ways visible only over geological timescales. By venturing out on predatory hunts, they indirectly controlled prey populations, indirectly determining which plant species thrived and which stagnated. As giant dragonflies, centipede-like hunters, and other arthropod predators moved through the understory, their selective predation exerted pressure on smaller insects, prompting shifts in herbivory patterns. Areas with high predation pressure show reduced damage to certain ferns and lycopsids, suggesting that predator presence indirectly guided plant community structure. This cascade effect highlights the role of arthropods as ecosystem regulators, where the consequences of predation extended far beyond the immediate act, shaping the ecological mosaic of Carboniferous swamps. Burrow networks created refuge for other organisms, revealing the indirect engineering effects of large arthropods on microhabitats. Fossilized tunnels of Arthropleura were often repurposed by smaller invertebrates and amphibians, providing shelter from predators and environmental stress. These burrows maintained moisture and moderated temperature, forming microclimates that enhanced survival for multiple species. By shaping spatial heterogeneity in otherwise homogeneous swamps, the activities of giant insects increased niche diversity, demonstrating that ecosystem engineering was not a byproduct, but a central element of their ecological presence. Layers of compressed sediment and accumulated exoskeletons contributed to peat formation, leaving a geological record intertwined with ecological impact. Layers rich in chitin, mineralized fragments, and compacted plant matter reveal how insect activity accelerated organic matter accumulation. These deposits formed the foundation of future coal seams, indicating that gigantism and behavioral patterns had a lasting imprint on Earth's carbon cycle. Geochemical studies show elevated nitrogen and phosphorus concentrations, coinciding with areas of intensive arthropod activity, highlighting the scale at which these creatures mediated nutrient flows and influenced the chemistry of their environment. Movement across the landscape through seasonal migrations and congregation zones acted as concentrated nodes of nutrient input, sculpting vegetation density and soil chemistry. Fossil assemblages suggest that certain swamp regions hosted cyclical gatherings of adult insects, leaving behind dense accumulations of exoskeletons, frass, and decaying matter. These inputs created hotspots of fertility, promoting plant growth and altering competitive dynamics among species. By concentrating resources spatially and temporally, these insects shaped patch dynamics across the swamp landscape, ensuring that their influence persisted even as individuals perished, a testament to the enduring power of collective behavior in ecosystem formation. In tracing these environmental imprints, the narrative illuminates the enduring legacy of giants who shaped the very stage on which they lived. The largest insects did not merely survive within the Carboniferous swamps. They molded the habitats that nurtured them, influencing plant distribution, soil structure, and nutrient flow. Fossil evidence, combined with modern analogues, reveals a pattern of ecosystem engineering whose effects extended far beyond immediate survival. The world they constructed, traversed, and modified created feedback loops of growth and decay that sustained not only their own populations, but the broader tapestry of life. Even as the last giants faded, the ecosystems they shaped retained the memory of their existence, a living testament to the power of arthropods as architects of the swamp. From the sweltering swamps to the shadowed forest floors, life in the Carboniferous teaches us the extraordinary possibilities of evolution when environment and physiology collide. Gigantic wings, armored exoskeletons, and labyrinthine forests reveal a world of scale and intensity beyond modern imagination, where survival demanded ingenuity, resilience, and adaptation. These ancient giants may have vanished, yet their echoes remain in every insect that scuttles, crawls, or takes to the air today. In their colossal shadows, we glimpse the delicate balance between power, vulnerability, and the relentless drive of life to endure. If you enjoyed this journey through deep time, don't forget to like, subscribe, and leave a comment sharing what fascinated you most.